1 minute till everybody is there.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of our fortnightly IRENA Insights webinar series. My name is Martina Lyons, and I'm from the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn, Germany. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, I would like to introduce you to IRENA and to our webinar series. So IRENA is an intergovernmental organization. We have currently 167 member countries, and another 17 countries are in their accession process. And we support countries in their transition to a sustainable energy future and serve as the principal platform for international collaboration, center of excellence, and a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. And because our analytical work and our engagement with our members generates a lot of valuable insights, we're always looking for ways how to share those insights with you. And that is why we have launched this IRENA Insights webinar series, which we are running every other week, usually on Tuesdays. We started in January 2020, before pandemics proliferated many virtual events. And so far we organize over 40 webinars of various topics, and you can check them all on our IRENA websites where there are presentation slides and also link to our YouTube channel. So we appreciate that there are many longer deep dive webinars out there, but what we are trying to do here is on contrary to keep these webinars short. So they last approximately 30 minutes, which means we clearly cannot cover everything, but the idea is to give you enough to decide whether you want to delve deeper into the topic. And we signpost in our presentations further sources of more in-depth information to help you to do that. So today, while you enjoy your coffee, tea or bagel in the next 30 minutes or so, I'm very excited to say that we are going to hear from two speakers, two experts working on ammonia. One is Gabriel Castellanos, who leads IRENA's work on decarbonization of shipping industry, which includes the work on ammonia. And the second is Kevin Ruvenhorst, who is a technology expert from the Ammonia Energy Association. This topic hasn't been extensively covered, and therefore I'm happy that we will hear Gabriel's and Kevin's key takeaway from their recent joint IRENA Ammonia Energy Association report called Innovation Outlook Renewable Ammonia. But before I hand over microphone to Gabriel and Kevin, just very briefly, a few usual housekeeping items. So next slide, exactly. So we are recording the webinar, and we will post the recording and slides on IRENA Events website. You are on mute, but if you have questions for Gabriel and Kevin, please use the Q&A function. And that's it. Without any further ado, let me welcome Gabriel and Kevin. Guys, welcome to our IRENA Insights webinar series. Thank you for accepting the invitation. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martina, for those opening remarks. And certainly very pleased to be here today with Kevin, representing the Ammonia Energy Association, and with whom IRENA has been working together shoulder by shoulder in developing these analyses, and indeed myself working very closely with Kevin, and that's how we managed to develop this. So thank you, very honored to be with you, Kevin, today. So thank you once again to everybody for joining us. I'll jump into the topic. So first of all, I would like to mention that all this work on ammonia is part of the overall work that the agency has in green hydrogen and its derivatives. On green hydrogen, IRENA is looking at all the sides of the value chain, including supply, demand, and trade. Here you have a small map of the different type of analyses that fall under each category. We've done actually quite some substantial work on it. Well, ammonia is the latest piece, and that is in between trade and demand. We'll discuss later on why. But also we've touched upon on supply side, let's say on renewable power generation, in order to power electrolyzers and other pathways for the production of hydrogen. On the demand side, we're looking at the different end-use sectors, especially those hard to decarbonize sectors, among those shipping. And of course, like all this work is supporting through different type of frameworks and work that we have on the top. So to jump into this into the topic that brings us here today, ammonia, like what is it expected in the next years, in the medium and long term. If we analyze and if we are to stick to a 1.5 scenario, it is expected that the renewable ammonia, overall ammonia demand will be close to 700 million tons by 2050. The most important sectors there or end users to be considered will be, of course, fertilizer application of on the fertilizer industry. That is expected to continue growing, but at a steady state. There are other existing uses, like the chemical industry particularly. It is important to note the role that ammonia will play as a hydrogen carrier. Uses and applications for stationary power are also expected to take off. One to mention is the one of Japan, where there is clear data about it, but might be other countries also that jump into this. But the one that is expected to grow the most and at the highest accelerated rate, that is international shipping. And in order to put this into perspective, today the global production is around 185 million tons, close to 200 million tons of ammonia. It is expected that overall ammonia will peak at close to 700 million tons. The shipping sector alone will require the same amount of ammonia that we are seeing being produced today. So that in terms of market projections by 2050, and this by 2050, and this is if we are to stick to a 1.5 scenario. From the supply side, the picture also comes with some uncertainties in terms of the share in between fossil ammonia. Today, the production that we have is exclusively fossil fuel with no carbon capture and storage. It is expected that the production of fossil ammonia with carbon capture and storage will increase slightly, but eventually the dominant origin of ammonia should be renewable. And we can see here how significant the investment needs to happen if we are to decarbonize some energy intensive sectors, and if we are to have green fertilizers. Clearly, there are implications in terms of the investment and deployment on renewable electricity generation, solar, wind, and other renewable sources. Now, I mentioned the relevance of ammonia, not only as a fuel to be used by end-use sectors, but also the role that it plays in the hydrogen trade. In fact, it is expected that most of the hydrogen that is traded globally will be traded in the form of ammonia, so by ships. That's very, very important to note. Around half of a little bit more than half of hydrogen trade will be in the form of ammonia. So it's very significant the role of ammonia, not only as an end-use fuel, but also as an enabler of hydrogen trade for other sectors. And clearly, one of the big questions is what is the production cost of ammonia? Nowadays, what we are seeing is that the cost of ammonia, depending the production pathway, something in which Kevin will develop later on, is in between 750 US per ton up to 1,300 US per ton. One of the questions is, how does it compete now with natural gas? And clearly the current context has put the clearly global context has resulted in very high prices of natural gas. And in that regard, we can say that green ammonia today, in comparison to European natural gas prices, is competitive. Clearly, there are many sides on many angles to be analyzed on the picture, but important to note that in the coming years, especially in the midterm and longer term, renewable ammonia is expected to have a more competitive cost and to be competitive in comparison to low carbon fossil ammonia. So having mentioned this, I'll pass the floor to you, Kevin. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. And so first of all, thank you so much for the kind invitation to participate in this webinar. And we would like to thank IRENA for the very nice and fruitful collaboration we've had to produce this report, Innovation Outlook Renewable Ammonia. Before I go into all the different technology pathways, I want to give a little bit of an introduction to the Ammonia Energy Association. So we are an industry association that advocates for the responsible use of ammonia as an energy carrier. And right now we have 160 members, about the number. And what we do is, on one hand, the supply side, so the ammonia production side, we try to decarbonize ammonia production. And on the demand side, so for the new energy markets, we try to adopt ammonia for these new markets. Next slide, please. So first of all, it's important to acknowledge how is ammonia produced. So ammonia is NH3, which is produced from hydrogen, so H2 and nitrogen N2 from the air in the Haber-Bosch process. And what's important to know here is that the hydrogen production is essentially taking almost all of the energy to produce ammonia. So typically more than 90% of your total energy consumption for your ammonia product goes into the hydrogen production. And then you see on the right-hand side different pathways. So at the bottom, you see fossil-based pathways from coal or from natural gas. You get fossil-based hydrogen, which sometimes is termed by some people gray hydrogen. Then you have different pathways to decarbonize fossil-based hydrogen production. And then you get into all kinds of shades of blue for hydrogen production. And when you couple that to nitrogen, you get ammonia. And then more towards the top, you see nuclear power. So then you can get nuclear-based hydrogen and nuclear-based ammonia. And at the very top, you have renewable electricity, for instance, from solar and wind or biomass. And that way you can produce renewable hydrogen and then renewable ammonia. What's important to note, and that's what you see on the left bottom, is that right now, essentially all ammonia is produced from fossil-based fuels. So about 75% is produced from natural gas, and about 25% is produced from coal and heavy fuel oil. And renewable ammonia account for less than 1% of the total ammonia production. And in total, that accounts for half a gigaton of CO2 annually, and that's about 1% of the total greenhouse gas emissions globally. Next slide, please. And when looking at the carbon intensities of these pathways, you see that it varies widely based on the graph. So for fossil-based pathways, so these are the gray bars, so natural gas, naphtha, heavy fuel oil, and coal. You see a CO2 footprint somewhere in the range of about 1.5 and 4 tons of CO2 per ton ammonia. And you see the more you go to the right, you have fossil-based pathways with a lower carbon footprint. And then to the very right, you see the renewable ammonia pathways. Also note that there is quite some spread in the data here. And the importance here to note is that it really depends on what you take into account. This will determine in the end your carbon footprint. Because, for instance, there are the CO2 emissions within the ammonia plant, but you can also have scope 2, scope 3 emissions. So, for instance, if you use natural gas, you can have upstream methane emissions, which should also be accounted for in the final carbon footprint. But also, we should not only focus on the CO2 footprint, but also on other greenhouse gas emission criteria, on other sustainability criteria. For instance, how much land do you use? How much water do you use? So these are also criteria to take into account. Next slide, please. So now let's have a look at the two pathways for renewable ammonia production. So the first pathway is actually electrolysis-based hydrogen production with zero carbon electricity. So what you can do here is you can use renewable electricity or nuclear power, that's also possible, as your electricity feedstock. And in a process that's called electrolysis, you can produce hydrogen and oxygen from water. And that's what you see on the bottom. So the hydrogen you produce in the electrolyzer, you can then pass it through a deoxo unit to make sure that there is no oxygen and no water anymore, because the ammonia synthesis loop doesn't like that so much because of the iron-based catalyst typically used in the ammonia synthesis loop. And when you then have this hydrogen, you can actually combine it with nitrogen from air. So nitrogen is purified from air using an air separation unit. And when you then combine the hydrogen and nitrogen, you can compress that in the ammonia synthesis loop, so the Haber-Bosch process. You then synthesize the ammonia, you liquefy the ammonia out, and you go to the conversion to ammonia. There's a lot of talk nowadays about renewable ammonia, and it's sometimes perceived as something new, but that's actually not true, because already in the 1920s, there were renewable ammonia plants. And actually in Italy, 100 years ago, there was already a renewable ammonia plant based on alkaline electrolysis and hydropower. And the main reason that we nowadays don't see so many of these plants anymore is that actually it became cheaper to produce hydrogen from natural gas reforming rather than from electrolysis. And so it's more a cost matter rather than a technology limitation. And nowadays we actually see a re-emergence of renewable ammonia, and the main reason for that is that there is really a drop in the cost for electricity from solar PV and wind energy to below $20 per megawatt hour. Next slide, please. So that's renewable ammonia production from electrolysis. But then there is also a second pathway, and that's from biomass. So actually biomass and biogas, and that's what you see on the right-hand side, can be used to produce ammonia. And for some of you who are familiar with ammonia production from fossil fuels, will remark that this is actually quite similar to natural gas-based ammonia production. So for instance, if you convert the biomass to biogas, then you can actually add this biogas to your natural gas-based ammonia production, and you have similar process steps as compared to a natural gas-based ammonia production. So there's the benefit that you can actually use it in existing facilities. However, biomass is typically more expensive on an energy basis than, for instance, coal or natural gas, or maybe even renewable electricity. So you might be wondering, why use biomass to produce ammonia? Well, an important reason for that, and that's what you see on the left bottom, is the current uses of ammonia. So right now, about 55% of all ammonia is used to produce a urea. And urea is a fertilizer, and it's actually the most used fertilizer in the world. And actually, because this urea has a carbon in there, so in the chemical formula, you require CO2 from a source together with ammonia to produce a urea. So if you're going to transition away from natural gas or coal for that matter, you simply don't have enough just by producing renewable ammonia from electrolysis. You need the CO2 from somewhere. And that's where the biomass can actually come in. So then it really depends on the market you're aiming for, which pathways might be the most suitable. So if you want to produce urea, it might be worthwhile to use biomass or biogas. Well, for instance, for the shipping sector, where you require just ammonia directly, you probably go to electrolysis-based ammonia production. Thank you for your attention. And now the word back to Gabriel.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you very much. Insightful presentation there, Kevin. Thank you. So now one of the big questions is how to shift from a world that is seeing fossil fuel ammonia out there and to shift to renewable ammonia. So there are a number of policy recommendations that we can give in order to close the gap. One of those is to establish a realistic carbon levy. Our analysis has showed that this should be for fossil-based ammonia with carbon capture and storage in between 60 and 90, and up to 150 US per ton of CO2 to bridge the gap between fossil-based ammonia and renewable ammonia. It will also be of high importance to translate political will into effective policies that are strong, stable, and sustained regulatory measures for fuel standards and renewable energy quotas or mandates. And this is especially the mandates would need to be applied in end-use sectors, for instance, for minimum shares of renewables in their mix. Also important it is to fund value change rather than non-technologies. As Kevin well mentioned, technologies are well advanced and the production of renewable ammonia is a well-proven technology with a lot of history behind. But we need to support the development and enhancement of value chains. So support the deployment by connecting the value chain across production, distribution, and utilization. This will require the establishment of strategic partnerships and sound synergies between that goes beyond the obvious players. So the power sector, the chemical industry, the energy sectors, as well as different organizations that play within the private and public sector. It will be very important to develop trade strategies and supply chains by encouraging international cooperation, as I mentioned in my last sentence, between project developers, as I said, ammonia companies, users, and importantly, this will come with benefits as well, because this will foster the creation of jobs and the creation of competitive new industries. Carbon border adjustment mechanisms are a good measure there that could support the shift from fossil-based ammonia to renewable ammonia. It is very important on the financial side to de-risk investment via financial instruments. On this regard, enable grants, for instance, for the development of projects. Investments, loans, loan guarantees, also to immediately secure a buyer of option projects. So there are a number of actions that can be taken. These ones that are being mentioned here are just a few, but certainly sending to all the audience here a kind of invitation to go through our report and read more the extent number of recommendations that we provide there that could support the deployment of renewable ammonia and shift from fossil-based ammonia to renewable ammonia in terms of supply and demand. Some final remarks. This is not just about fossil-based ammonia versus renewable ammonia. Actually, if we are to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 centigrades by 2050, renewable ammonia plays an important, very important role, I would say, actually, in order to reach close to net zero by mid-century. Plays a very important role. as I said, not just as a renewable fuel, but also as a green hydrogen trade enabler. In terms of the end use of ammonia, ammonia is expected to play a pivotal role in some energy-intensive industries. The chemical industry, the transport sector, especially shipping, as I mentioned. Kevin made a good emphasis on the need to have renewable ammonia on the contract side. Really, acquiring renewable sources of CO2 will be important for producing green urea. Just to emphasize the relevance of renewable ammonia from a climate perspective, if we are to be aligned by 2050 with a 1.5 centigrade scenario. The main driver in order to have cost competitive ammonia will be having access to cheap, affordable hydrogen. That's very important to note. So special attention is to be given to the hydrogen value chain. Renewable ammonia is coming for sure, and we should not see it as a challenge, but actually as a number of investments and employment opportunities. And we actually have to start thinking how to seize those opportunities. So we here today use this space in order to invite everybody to think and consider how can we do in order to do that, how to seize those opportunities and fast forward the shift from fossil-based ammonia to renewable ammonia, and more importantly, how to seize the opportunities while also being aligned with a 1.5 centigrade scenario and limited amount of the. So with this, thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin. I'll pass the floor to you, Martina, in case there's interest.
Yeah, you were breaking a little bit, Gabriel, but thank you very much to both of you. You covered a lot in your presentation. I will not try to summarize it because we are running out of time. So let me go directly to a few questions. One, Gabriel, for you. The audience was asking if you can repeat again the expected amount of ammonia in the shipping sector once again, because they couldn't hear. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Martina. So today's global ammonia production is close to 200 million tons, mostly exclusively from fossil fuel. By 2050, for international shipping alone, it is expected to require around 183 million tons of renewable ammonia. So for the international shipping sector alone, we would require to double the production of today's the production of renewable ammonia compared to today's production that we are seeing. But it needs to be renewable. So basically, that's what is required there.
Great, thank you. One for Kevin. There are a couple of comments about if you can elaborate a little bit more on the point, why does it make sense to use biomass for the production of urea?
Yeah, I can elaborate on that. So if you use fossil-based feedstocks and you use urea for fertilizers, in the end, what's going to happen is that the CO2 will end up in the atmosphere. So you will have a net CO2 emission. So you're actually using for a circular CO2 source. And there are two ways you can do this. You can capture CO2 from the air, so with direct air capture, or you can use biomass where you produce both CO2 and hydrogen in a circular manner. And then we actually think that biomass is a competitive technology there versus direct air capture to produce circular urea.
Thank you. Let's take one or two questions. There is one and it's up to you who you decide to start with. So you were saying that we should fund value chains rather than loan technologies. So there is a question, which step in the value chain of renewable ammonia or hydrogen is the one where the most innovation is needed? So maybe, I don't know, Gabriel and Kevin can...
Okay. Would you like to take this one, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. So what I think is there are two parts to this. So on the production side, you see now that you have intermittent renewables, such as solar and wind, and there should be some funding from governments to de-risk actually the private sector to actually build these plants, because nobody has ever built a large-scale renewable ammonia plant based on intermittent renewables. So some de-risking there would be useful. And also on the utilization side, we now see that, for instance, the shipping sector, but also in the power sector, there are like early commercial technologies being developed, probably commercializing around 2025. So it would really help there as well to stimulate that this end use sector that takes off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Perhaps just to complement to what Kevin said, I think that it is also very important to have to work closer, like on the supply side and in coordination with the demand side. Luckily, we are seeing that type of coordination already in the sector. For instance, European countries are working with the north of Africa in terms of investing the project there, investing in the development of green hydrogen fuel production in the north of Africa, but at the same time, they are working close with the end users, for instance, with the shipping sector. That's something that we've seen with methanol, for instance, and this is a very specific project. No need to mention the details here, but those dynamics are already happening. So it's very important to bring together the supply side, the demand side, and for the investor to know that his product already has secured a market out there.
Very well explained. Thank you. And maybe one more question. It's more about the projections by 2050. So if you can say a little bit more about the uncertainties which are linked to the market projection for ammonia. Maybe Gabriel can start.
Thank you, Martina. So for instance, if we stick to the shipping sector, one of the question marks there is how effective will be the current energy efficiency policies that we have in place, because depending how effective and how does the sector embrace or not energy efficiency, we will have a final demand of X or of X plus 1, and that will represent eventually given an X amount of ammonia or an X plus 1 amount of ammonia. So for instance, the energy efficiency will have an impact in terms of those market projections. And also like the plans of the different countries in terms of stationary power, for instance, we are certain Japan has given very clear indications and signs about their interest in collaborating with the renewable ammonia. But in the coming years, some other countries will also jump in and mention this. That will result in a higher demand of renewable ammonia, for instance.
Yeah, so maybe I can add on top of
please
that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing to also consider here is that a few years ago, 5 years ago, ammonia wasn't really considered as an energy carrier in the wider field. So every year we get a new projection, and the discussion shouldn't be so much is it now going to be 688 megatons of ammonia by 2050 or 600 or 800. It's more we see that certain markets are developing, and it really depends on how the competitive technologies are developing as well. And are we going to electrify a lot of the infrastructure, or are we still going to be dependent more on hydrogen fuels? So the key takeaway here is it's going to be multiple times of the current production, and it will be adopted for new energy markets. But the exact numbering that's not so much important in the end. It's just multiple times the current production. So that's really a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your questions, for your presentation. Unfortunately, our 30 minutes is coming to close. So I would like to thank you again, Kevin and Gabrielle, for your time, for sharing with us your knowledge and your experience working on this topic and all the challenges you encounter when it comes to the topic of ammonia. And I would like to thank you all for joining us today, for listening and for your questions. And we hope you learned something new. We will be putting the presentation on the website in the next 48 hours. And what comes next? We are going to take a summer break until the beginning of September, and then we will start again. We will look into grid codes for the power sector. We will do one on the annual update of the cost in renewable electricity, hydrogen trade, and much more. So please stay tuned, and we hope to see you all in the fall. So that is all from us for today. I wish you a very good rest of the day. Thank you again to Kevin and Gabrielle. Goodbye and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Bye-bye.